Welcome to the Graduate Institute. It's my real pleasure to welcome Stephan Klement today. Welcome, Stephan. Stephan is the special envoy of the European Union for disarmament and nuclear proliferation, in addition to having another hat, which is the special advisor on the Iran nuclear issue. Stephan, can you tell us a little bit how the EU came to have such a prominent role in the negotiation with Iran over the size and type of nuclear program it has?
No, thank you very much, Grégoire. Pleasure to be at the Institute, of course. I mean, you ask a very pertinent question, and this, of course, comes over time. The EU started to be engaged in this process more than 20 years ago. And of course, the EU is, in a sense, on the one hand, representing the EU member states in this regard, but also due to this specific function of the EU and this kind of expertise on building consensus and fertile ground for compromise, the EU over time grew into a more important and relevant role in these Iran negotiations, becoming kind of the interface between the E3+3, the 5 Security Council members and Germany and Iran, but also kind of a coordinator of this process. And this was later on even reflected in some Security Council resolutions. And most recently, of course, in 2015, a while ago, but still very relevant, the EU became kind of the impersonification of the JCPOA negotiations and afterwards also in the implementation of this agreement.
So we all know that the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or we can call it the Iran nuclear deal, was signed in 2015. Then during the first presidency of President Trump, the US withdrew from the agreement, and increasingly the Iranians withdrew also from the agreement by not following the nuclear restrictions that are planned. How do you see the situation today? There is talk of new processes taking place. How is the EU accompanying these processes?
First of all, it's exactly correct. The situation today, as you point out, through these steps which have happened, is totally different from 10 or 20 years ago. On the one hand, we have this very big expansion of the Iranian nuclear program, which is at least, I would say, 100 times bigger without going into technical details, as it was when the JCPOA was in place. And of course, at the same time, also the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, who is in charge of monitoring this program, does not have the same access anymore and has lost a lot about the continuity of knowledge. There are some processes going on today. I don't want to go into too much detail. The EU as such is still formally in charge to coordinate the JCPOA process based on Security Council Resolution 2231. And this resolution, while it will expire in October this year, late in October, the EU is still in charge to run this process, to be a kind of neutral arbiter in this process, and the EU will continue to play this role. Obviously, more importantly, it would be to find some kind of succession agreement, some replacement agreement to the JCPOA in order to contain the Iranian nuclear program.
Mm-hmm. So there's been a lot of talk since President Trump too has come back to the White House that the US president has a specific type of negotiation, that he has developed an art of the deal that may become more from real estate negotiation than multilateral diplomacy. So is the EU well equipped to deal with that art of the deal? Is it working in a complementary fashion, or is it more astonished by this way of doing diplomacy in a sense?
It will not come as a surprise that what we see today is very different from what we see in the run-up to the agreement of 2015. This is more kind of ad hoc talks, more of exploratory style. Very little is known. I do not think, thinking back to 2015, I do not see a lot of similarities at this point. In 2014-15, there was a very complex and comprehensive process in place of multilateral negotiations with many actors, which also increased in a certain way the pressure on Iran to come to agreement. There was also different levels of negotiations, also on many technical details, because I think for this kind of problem, the Iran nuclear issue, the details, they matter a lot. and everything has to be well defined, and all the details have to be addressed, some arrangements have to be in place, but also some kind of positive follow-up mechanism, which, as I said earlier, the EU is in charge of implementing JCPOA in line with Security Council resolution, and there was a joint commission created, presided by the EU, but also several working groups, and all this we don't see today. This does not mean that these negotiations or talks could not over time lead to success, but still a lot is needed from my perspective. And the EU definitely is very well equipped, as I said before, because the whole kind of structure and process in the EU, which we see in Brussels, are always meant to harmonize, to create common ground, to build consensus. So I think the EU is a very dedicated player for such activities.
And you put emphasis on the technical expertise that is necessary to arrive at the calculation of certain concepts like the breakout time, or would you call it science diplomacy, this field of diplomacy, or would you have a different term?
I would definitely say science in 2014-15 was at the core of this agreement, because this agreement is based on this scientific approach, which is breakout time, production of fissile material in a certain time frame, which could be used for a nuclear weapon. It's actually interesting that science diplomacy, in my view, also played a role in 2015, because the two of the key proponents on the Iranian and the US side were scientists, namely the head of the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran, Dr. Salehi, and the Secretary of Energy in the US, Ali Moniz. They had both a science background from MIT, and science diplomacy in a sense helps a lot to talk about facts, about figures, about scientific concepts. So this is very relevant. But of course, the scientific concept as such, which was used for this agreement, goes beyond science diplomacy in a classical sense.
And not everybody knows that you're a very good friend of the Institute. Actually, we taught for 3 years a class in the Master of International Affairs and Development called the Iran Nuclear Negotiation from 2016 to 19. So at the time where there was hope that the JCPOA would be fully implemented. And in this special issue of global challenges, we talk a lot about the type of skills that one needs to acquire, not only at school, but also from experience, to become a diplomat. In this case, it's a very specific negotiation that took place over 20 years, that is still not over. What are the specific skills that are most needed for a diplomat like yourselves?
I would say for a nuclear negotiator, I would call a nuclear diplomat, whatever, there's no official kind of working description. It's very relevant on the one hand to have the technical knowledge, but also this capacity to translate technical knowledge into political information in order to transmit this to the higher level. So I think it's very central to be able to simplify. And often for scientists, it's very difficult to simplify because they think about all the details, all the asymptotic cases. So I think here you have to make a very strong effort to bring this in common sense language. And another important element for sure is the understanding that you can also, in a certain way, speak about these things in ways which allow the common public to understand. So there's a lot of public diplomacy also in this element, because only if you gain the public opinion, if you can explain to the public opinion in simple terms, only then you can on the long term sustain the public image of an agreement, which is very central, because as you know, social media and public diplomacy is part of this exercise nowadays. And very central, I think, is to have also psychological understanding of the interlocutors. And in particular, if we speak about Iran, I think this is a very specific negotiation culture.
Yeah, no, I was going to ask you about this issue, because you may be the foreign diplomat with whom Iran has negotiated for the longest period of time a central agreement for them, which is how their nuclear program can become acceptable and that it can be purely peaceful in a verifiable manner. How is it to negotiate with Iranian diplomats? Is there something specific that you learn over time?
It's a fascinating experience. Otherwise, I would not have been doing it for more than 20 years. It is definitely something which I think you have to become a good listener, to listen to them, also between the lines, to understand their position, their situation, their psychological background on this. They are extremely kind of difficult to build a relationship with. It takes a long time, which is often very cumbersome. But at the same, once you have built this relationship, you will catch up on the time, so to speak, lost. So I think it's a well done investment. I think it's also very central to always help them to present things in a positive way. So you have to sell things, but not, I would say, in this normal commercial sense. But if, for instance, you look at JCPOA, if you read the JCPOA, let's say the main part, you will read it from a Western perspective as there are limitations on the program and so on. But from a Tehran perspective, you can also read it in a way that it's the kind of evolution of a nuclear program which is described in this. So it's not only... It's in a positive language, and this is very centralizing. So to understand them, to listen, and also to help them to create a positive narrative.
Yeah, isn't that a general approach to diplomacy that could be applied to many countries and that many diplomats should learn, which is quite different from the art of the deal in a sense?
It is for sure a tool which is used for it, but I think in the Iranian case, it is even more time-consuming and more kind of more investment is needed to really come to this point where you can really become, at some point in negotiations, you always become transactional. But what is the difference? I think when you say the art of the deal, you believe you can enter immediately into some transactional exercise, and this is not possible with Iranians, at least from my experience. You have to build a relationship, and you have to build the context, you have to build some understanding in order to really do the deal in a certain way.
So now we're back to a moment of uncertainty. We don't know if any type of common framework will be found by the different parties at the negotiating table. Would you say this is a central issue for the whole nuclear non-proliferation regime? Can there be some systemic effects of failure or success?
I'm 100% convinced that the kind of destiny or the kind of evolution of the Iranian nuclear issue will massively influence the overall nuclear non-proliferation world and architecture. We will have next year the NPT review conference in April, May 2026. If this issue is not somehow resolved, the Iran nuclear issue, there will be some massive focus on this issue. And of course, this is not an issue which can be contained. If Iran, Iranian nuclear program goes on unabatedly, there will be some spread to other countries in the region. And also, maybe not as relevant as NPT, but also the International Atomic Energy Framework on safeguards will also be massively affected. So I think there is a very strong determination and hopefully will to address this issue in the next coming months in order to prevent some kind of negative influence on the overall non-proliferation regime, which would play out in particular next year.
And to conclude, maybe with the last question, and zooming back to Geneva, where we are located, how do you perceive the role of Geneva in this disarmament and non-proliferation talks? There's been a lot of criticism, of skepticism over the role of the Disarmament Commission with different treaties, like the Fissile Material Cutoff Treaty, being stuck there for some long time. So how do you see the future of Geneva in these disarmament and non-proliferation talks? I mean, for sure, Geneva is a hub for disarmament issues. We have the conference on disarmament here. It's not super successful in the past decades, but still it's important to have this discussion because this discussion often provides the input for discussion which take place somewhere else. And needless to say that Geneva has always been, in Switzerland as such, kind of a venue for high-stake international negotiations. And as you well know, in terms of JCPOA and the predecessor agreement, the JPOA, many of these discussions took place here in Geneva, in Montreux, in Lausanne, and Geneva has been and will always be a very important center for these kind of discussions. Obviously, there's also Vienna. The IAEA is located there, but Geneva is equally relevant. Well, thank you very much for your time, Stephan. It was a pleasure to have you. It was a pleasure to be here in Geneva and at the Institute. Thank you very much, Grégoire. Thank you.